Yeah, so we are not going to have a presentation today. Maybe from next week onwards, we are going to have presentation again. So we'll be just going through our usual discussion. So before going into this article that we have been reading since last class, did you go through this article or some other related documents related to the topic of our discussion? Or what do you think of the discussion that we had in the last class? Everybody is keeping silent. What is the topic that we have been discussing? Physics, specifically quantum physics and Buddhist understanding of real existence, right? And if you look at the article, the discussion was focused on Nagarjuna's understanding of emptiness, and then scientific understanding of quantum physics. So it represents a kind of a comparative, study. So the author is trying to look at this discussion of quantum physics from the, Nagarjuna's perspective of emptiness, right? So I know that this is probably going to be a little bit, difficult. So that is why I asked you to go through these documents to have a kind of a familiarity, and when you go through these documents, you can make your own notes. Otherwise, it is going to be a little difficult because there are a lot of discussions that are abstract. So you need to really focus on the discussion. You need to pay sufficient amount of attention so that things become clear to you. Okay, so that is the idea. So does anyone have any questions or remark to make? If not, we'll be directly going to this article. But before that, I was thinking that, probably to be familiar a little bit with Nagarjuna's ways of thinking, I wanted to go through at least one of his chapter, especially the chapter that, focuses on the discussion of self-nature, examination of self-nature, that is Swabhava, because it is generally understood that the emptiness idea that Acharya Nagarjuna discussed is against this idea of self-nature, basically Swabhava, because in the Abhidharma traditions, the Abhidharmika masters, the Abhidharmikas, when analyzing this world of experience in terms of dharmas, they are saying that each of these dharmas having their own nature, that differentiates one dharma from another. Okay, so for example, in the case of Theravada Abhidharma, there is a number of dharmas, rupa dhammas, or dhammas in terms of chitta and chatasika, right? 89 chittas, and then 52 chatasikas. Nirvana is also counted as one dharma. Similarly, in the Sarvastivada Abhidharma, you have a different number of dharmas, So this Abhidharmikas came up with this number of dharmas to analyze this world of experience, right? To explain what is really real, what is the reality. So that is the idea, right? And if you remember, we have been discussing that these masters, they were practitioners, so they came up with these ideas of dharmas to explain the world of experience, uh, not based on their philosophical thinking only, but based on their meditative experience. Okay, so it is said that to make sense of their meditative experience, in words, they came up with these ideas. Okay, so they analyzed the world of experience in terms of dharmas. And of course, you can find this analysis in the early Buddhist text as well, but it is in a more simpler form. For example, in terms of 5 aggregates, right? So when a being is analyzed in terms of 5 aggregates. But with regard to each aggregate, it is said that it is impermanent, right? There is no self to be found in any of this aggregate, right? So these 5 aggregates are examined or explained in terms of 3 universal characteristics of existence: anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So the problem is that what we have been discussing is that in the discussion of physics, things are understood, or in terms of how do you say, physical reality, but following the method of analysis, especially to find out the fundamental building blocks of reality. What is there that is not reducible anymore? So what are the things that this scientist came up with? Do you remember anything? Atoms, right? And then if you divide the atom, if you go further into the analysis of atoms, what do you find? It is consisted of electrons, neutrons, and protons, right? But in the further analysis, when it comes to the discussion of quantum physics, it says that this fundamental unit of existence appear to function as waves, sometimes as waves and sometimes as particle, right? So people are not in a position to really identify what it is, because sometimes it appears to be particle, sometimes it appears to be wave, right? And it is said that when an examination is carried out, an observation or investigation is carried out, experiment is carried out, the reality as it is functioning, as it is there, is affected by the machines, affected by the external forces. Therefore, it is really not possible to identify exactly, or it is not really possible to know what it is. So if you remember, I have been mentioning it earlier also, that some people went so far as to call it as ghost, because it is something that is not really known. It is not clear what it is. Okay, And then when we come to read this particular essay, where this understanding of quantum physics is looked at from the perspective of emptiness, we came to know that the author has presented 4 different viewpoints, right? If you remember, 4 different viewpoints, right? Um, Substantialism, that is the first one, and then subjectivism, and the third one is holism, and the fourth one is instrumentalism, right? And then in the following discussions, the author is comparing these 4 approaches, 4 methods, with 4 tatralama called Chatushkuti, right? And it says that, as we can see in the discussion of Nagarjuna, following this, how do you say, taking the concept of emptiness as an instrument, he refuted all these 4 standpoints. So that is what we are going to, explore today, because one thing is that according to Buddhism, the world of experience, or the phenomenological world, or even ontological world, is not looked at just in terms of physical reality, just in terms of physics. Neither it is looked at merely in terms of consciousness. Okay, so so how it is really looked at, it is described in Buddhism, especially in the system of emptiness. We are going to know about it, but as I said, let us first look at this one chapter where you can really find how Nagarjuna used his logical explanation, logical thinking to refute the idea of swabhava. And this idea of swabhava is actually very much connected to the discussion of existence and non-existence. Okay, because when you talk about existence, you are affirming that there is something that exists. What is this? But then the problem with regard to this idea of existence is that it should exist, it should not perish. But that is not the reality, because there is change. And when you talk of change, the question is, what is it that changes? Or these are just some concepts, or probably our misconceptions, right? Yeah. So let us look at this chapter called Swabhava Pariksha first, and then we'll come back to the discussion of Nagarjuna's emptiness and quantum physics later. Can you all see my computer screen?
Okay, you can see it.
Yes, very good. So this is chapter 15 of the book Mula Madhyamika Karika, Swabhava Pariksha, examination of self-nature, right? So this is how it is discussed here. Na sambhavaha swabhavasya yuktaha pratyaya hetubi hetu pratyaya sambhutaha swabhavaha kritako bhavet. And this is the English translation of this Sanskrit verse. So it says that it is unreasonable for an essence to arise from causes and conditions. Whatever essence arose from causes and conditions would be something that has been made. I'd suggest that when we are going through this, chapter, if you are willing, you can make some short notes of the important points so that it becomes clear to you. Okay, so here, what it says here is that when you talk about an essence, swabhava, so this is a very important term here, as you can see in the chapter title, Swabhava Pariksha. You are talking about swabhava. He says that all the dharmas having their own nature, and that is how you differentiate one dharma from another. For example, anger is differentiated from loving kindness, right? Anger has its own nature. Loving kindness has its own nature. Both are, different, right? Similarly, if you talk about physical dharmas in terms of mahabhutas, elements, great elements, air has its own nature, fire has its own nature, water has its own nature, right? So this way, all the dharmas are separated in terms of having their own nature. But in Buddhism, I think you are all familiar that there is a very important discussion on causality. Things function in terms of causality, right? That is a very important topic of discussion in Buddhism. Nothing happens without causes and conditions, right? So it says that in the first statement, if you are talking about an essence arising from causes and conditions, because there is a discussion of causes and conditions in Buddhism, and it is accepted by everyone that things function only in terms of causality. In that case, when you talk about an essence of something, this essence arises based on causes and conditions, not without causes and conditions. So therefore, it says that whatever essence arose from causes and conditions would be something that has been made. So this essence that has arisen from causes and conditions should not be considered as something real. Why is that? Because it is made up. Something that is made up, something that is created, is not, is not to be considered as something that is really truly existing, really there, right? It is a created self-nature, made up self-nature. Now, all these points are very important to note. So I would assume that, you pay a good amount of attention to these things. Otherwise, you'll be lost halfway, okay? Now let's move on to the next verse. Swabhavaha kritako nama bhavishyati puna katang akritrimaha swabhavo hi nirapekshaha paratracha. So it says that how is it possible for there to be an essence which has been made essence are not contrived and not dependent on anything else. So this is, in a way, a kind of a further elaboration of the previous statement. So here he is asking that how can you, consider it, or how can you define it as essence, because it is, made up, it is created. Because by logic, essence should be something that does not depend on anything, right? That is there, that should be there, existing there without causes and conditions. So that is the statement he made here. It says that essences are not contrived and not depend on anything else. By logic, should not depend on anything else. But you are saying that this essence is made up. Okay, let's move on to the third verse. Kutaha swabhavasya bhave parabhavo bhavishyati swabhavaha parabhavasya parabhavo hi katyate. Yeah. So he's saying here that if an essence does not exist, how can the thingness of the other exist? Also referring to essence, actually, parabhava, the existence of other, okay, other existent. Swabhava and parabhava, these two are important terms. You can note down if you like. Swabhava and parabhava. The discussion began with swabhava, and now moving towards the discussion of parabhava, because when you discuss about swabhava, you use swa, own nature, as opposed to something other, para, right? Because there is comparison, right? For the essence of the thingness of the other is said to be the thingness of the other. Yeah. Yes. So it says that so far we have been discussing about self-nature, and we came to know that it is made up. Now, if this self-nature does not exist, because why it does not exist? Because by logic, self-nature should not be something that is made up. And since it is made up, it doesn't exist. It is a made up self-nature. We cannot really call it as self-nature. And if there is no self-nature, you cannot talk about other nature as well. When there is no swabhava, you cannot talk about parabhava as well. Why is that? Because the parabhava is the nature of that, the self-nature of that other thing, right? You are getting it or not? Yeah. First of all, Acharya Nagarjuna is denying that as the opponent, the other school, is presenting the idea of swabhava, that is not real. Why is that? Because it is created, it is caused by different conditions, right? It is a production of causality. Therefore, it is not real. And then as soon as you talk about swabhava, self-nature, you are in the discussion of other nature as well. And then he is saying that since we found out that self-nature actually doesn't exist, essence actually doesn't exist, then you cannot really talk about parabhava to be there. Because the parabhava, the essence of the other, is similar to this essence of this thing, the own nature, swabhava. So when swabhava doesn't exist, parabhava also cannot exist. It is like saying that, Now you are talking about two things. For example, as I said, okay, now let's take, for example, the two dharmas. And among these two dharmas, you are talking of self nature of a particular dharma, and the other dharma you regard as other dharma having its own self nature. So both the dharmas, in fact, all the dharmas having their own nature. So when you deny the own being or self nature or essence of one dharma, automatically you deny the essence of the other dharma, because the other dharma having parabhava is the essence of that dharma. That is the swabhava of that dharma that you call other, essence of other dharma, right? So it is like, you are shifting viewpoints from, when you are referring to swabhava from this side, you are referring to the other dharma as, the essence of other dharma as parabhava, right? But the essence of other dharma actually, the swabhava of that dharma. I think it is clear. Let's move on to the next verse. Swabhava parabhavabhyam rite bhavaha kutah puna swabhave parabhave cha sati bhavohi siddhyate. Yeah. Apart from an essence and the thingness of the other, what things are there? If essences and thingness of others exist, things would be established. Yeah. So now he's moving on to the another statement in this verse. So he's saying that, okay, now since we have denied that there is no self nature, no swabhava, and then no parabhava, now how do you talk about existence? What really exists? In the absence of swabhava and parabhava, can you really talk of existence? Because he says, yes.
So I just wondered what Nagarjuna refers to. He indicated that there is no essence, there is no thingness apart from causes and conditions.
Yeah, right.
So like the swabhava or the essence or the thingness, just fake the name, come from the thing. Okay.
These are just concepts. He's saying that these are just concepts. They do not have any real existence.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Clear.
So he's saying that when there is no swabhava and when there is no parabhava, can you really talk of existence? Right? What exists? Right? So that is the question here, because he's saying that if essences and thingness of others existed, if swabhava and parabhava existed, then only you can talk of, existence of things. Okay, now if you cannot talk about existence, now here comes the other, part of the discussion. Can you really talk about non-existence? Bhavasya chet aparasiddhir abhavo naiva siddhyati bhavasya he anyatha bhavam abhavam bruvate janaha. If things were not established, non-things would not be established. When a thing becomes something else, people say that it is a non-thing. Very logical here. So he says that when now we know that, existence is not established, right? So if you are talking about existence of something, that something should exist, that something should have its own nature. Since there is no self nature, no other nature, you cannot talk about something existing. Okay, so when you cannot really talk about existence of thing or existence in general, non-existence is not to be found, is also not to be found, because non-existence is the change of existence. Okay, it is like how do you say, the changing phases, right? So you talk about something non-existing because it has changed to something else. So there should be something to change, right? So you can come into the discussion of existence only when there is something and that thing changes. If it is from the beginning there and it is not changing, you cannot come to the discussion of existence and non-existence also. You cannot really talk about non-existence because it is there from the beginning and it will be there. But if it is not there at all, then whose existence and non-existence are you talking about? Yeah. So therefore he says that if things were not established, non-things would not be established as well. If existence is not established, non-existence is also not established, because when a thing becomes something else, when a thing changes, people say that is non-thing. Okay, when something changes, then people say that it is not this anymore, it is something else. Okay, let's look at the following verse. Swabhavam parabhavam cha bhavam cha bhavam eva cha ye pashyanti na pashyanti te tattvam buddha sasane. So he says that those who view swabhava, parabhava, existence, non-existence, they do not see the suchness in the teaching of the Buddha. Tattvam. Tattva is suchness, the true teaching, the true reality in the teaching of the Buddha is not seen, is not understood by those who view the world, everything in terms of swabhava, parabhava, existence and non-existence. So this is his statement based on the previous discussion. Let's see what he has to say in the following verses. Now here he's taking, a quotation from early Buddhist text, from one of the sutta, from the Nikaya text. He's providing a reference here. Katyayana vavade chastiti nastiti chobayam pratisiddham bhagavata bhava bhava vibhavina. So now he's taking this reference saying that, through knowing things and non-things, the Buddha negated both existence and non-existence in his advice to Katyayana. So there is a sutta called Kachana Gutta Sutta, where the Buddha is addressing to this person called Katyayana or Kachana. And Buddha is saying that Katyayana, all exist is one extreme, all does not exist is another extreme. The Buddha does not say that, all exist or all does not exist. So that statement is taken as a reference point by Acharya Nagarjuna. He's saying that because the Buddha have seen, Buddha have realized, what is existence or non-existence. He has really understood what it means by existence and non-existence. Therefore, he negated both existence and non-existence. Yadi astitvam prakritya syan na bhavet asya nastita prakrite anyata bhavo nahi jato papadyate. If things existed essentially, they would not come to non-existence. It is never the case that an essence could become something else. So these are, in a way, a reaffirmation of his previous discussion that, if you say that something exists, then you cannot talk of its non-existence. That is not possible. Why? Because when you talk of its existence in terms of self nature and other nature, by definition, self nature means, swabhava means, it should be there, it should not be produced. It is there since the beginningless time, and it should not change. And without change, existence is not possible. When there is no existence, there is no discussion of non-existence. So if it is there, it should not change. It cannot become something else. Prakritau kasya vasatyam anyata tvam bhavishyati prakritau kasya vasatyam anyata tvam bhavishyati. Yeah, so one is positive, one is negative. If essences did not exist, what could become something else? Even if essences existed, what could become something else? Do you get the point here? If there is no swabhava, what will change? Nothing to change, right? And if there is swabhava, how can it change? So in any case, change is not possible. When change is not possible, you cannot talk about existence and non-existence. So it's providing the limitation of logic, the limitation of thinking. How far can you go? Right? And he's trying to show that the real teaching of the Buddha, the suchness, tattva of the Buddha is beyond them. You cannot really figure out by logic. So he's trying to, how do you say, show the limitation of logical thinking. Okay, let's look at the following verse. Astiti shashwata graho nastiti uchcheda darshanam tasmat astitva nastitve nashriyate yata vichakshana. Yeah, so here now finally he's providing a kind of conclusive statement in relation to these two popular concept of Saswatavada and Uchedavada, existentialism and annihilationism. He's saying that existence is the grasping at permanence. When you grasp that something is there, when you grasp at permanence, you talk of existence. Non-existence or annihilationism is the view of annihilation, complete destruction, complete non-existence. Therefore, the wise do not dwell in existence nor non-existence. So now in early Buddhism, for example, there is the discussion of when there is a discussion of dependent origination or causality, it is explained in terms of arising and ceasing, right? Arising and ceasing. So the Buddha says that if you just see arising, you hold on to the view of existentialism, permanence. So you also have to know that whatever that arises must cease. It is just a process. But those who just see the cessation, they hold on to the view of annihilationism, that actually there is nothing, it is. That is also another extreme. And then therefore it says that vichakshanaha, those who are wise, clever, they do not dwell into these two ideas, two concepts, either existence or non-existence. Okay, so this is the last verse. Asti yadhi swabhavena natam nastiti shashwatam nastidanim abhut purvam iti ucheda prasajyate. Since that which exists by its essence is not non-existent, is the view of permanence. That which arose before is now non-existent, leads to the view of annihilation. So this can be compared to bhavaditti and vibhavaditti. Bhavaditti means view of becoming, vibhavaditti view of non-becoming. Is it clear? Any questions so far? So this is in a way a summary that I have, very briefly noted down based on the discussion. I hope that this will clarify if there is any confusion. So basically what it says is that self-nature, that is swabhava, produced from causes and condition, is something constructed. It is made up, right? That is the first statement. By definition, there cannot be a constructed self-nature. It is not possible by definition, right? On the contrary, a non-constructed, hence non-dependent self-nature also cannot exist. If it is not constructed, how can it exist? Then it should exist forever, right? Yeah. Without self-nature, when the Swabhava is denied, when Nagarjuna came up with this idea that there is no Swabhava, there cannot be other nature, there cannot be Parabhava also. Why is that? Because the Swabhava of Para is called Parabhava, right? So since self nature is denied, then other nature also cannot exist. So this is the second point. Thirdly, he is saying that without self and other nature, since these two are denied now, there cannot be existence. Why is that? Because then there is no identity. When there is no self nature, no other nature, what is it that should exist? What is it that should continue? How do you define it? And if there is no existent, how can there be non-existent? If there is no existent, there cannot be non-existent as well. Why? Because people generally think the non-existent is nothing but the change of existence. This is generally the idea that when you talk of something to not exist, you mean that it has been existing before, it is now not existing. It changed, right? So in the absence of existence, you cannot discuss about non-existence. Those who perceive self-nature as well as other nature, that is Swabhava and Parabhava, existence as well as non-existence, they do not perceive the truth embodied in the Buddha's teaching. Right? And it is clearly mentioned in the sutta that exist is one extreme, does not exist is another extreme. That is from the Kachanagutta Sutta. We can talk of existence only in terms of primal nature. Then its change is not possible. Primal nature means something that is existing from the beginning. And it should be there forever. So if it is like that, then its change is not possible. Again, if primal nature is non-existent, whose change can there be? So in any case, change is not possible. So exist implies eternalism. Does not exist implies annihilationism. A wise person should not rely upon this. So that is his viewpoint. Now I think we can proceed towards this article and try to understand how quantum physics is approached from the perspective of emptiness. Any question or remark?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that whether I understood is correct. So here, essence means the nature of thing or something that is unchangeable for everything.
Nature means.
Yes. The
Nature
word
means nature here refers to Swabhava. Swabhava means as long as there is a discussion of permanently existing things in any sense, if anyone says that this is something that is unique to this thing and it is there, it is this uniqueness that separates itself from other things. Okay, so it is its self nature. This is something that identifies it. Okay, on the conventional level, this is all okay, this is all true, but here the discussion is in terms of real existence, because we are here discussing about what really exists, right? For example, if you even I think probably you can take this example of atoms in the physics. They came up with these different elements. Now, if somebody says that these elements are real, they have their own independent nature, right? Yeah. Then this discussion will arise.
So there are two levels to discuss this concept. One is conventional, and
One is ultimate, yes.
okay.
So what is happening here is using the conventional language and expressions. They are trying to discuss something that is beyond conventional truth.
Yes, yes, it's true. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, now shall we continue to read this essay, or you want to have some break for a few minutes? If not, we can continue with this essay. Yes, so in the last class, we have already discussed about quantum physics a little bit, and I have shown you a video clip as well. So here is some discussion that you can find from the article that I sent to you from Britannica, Encyclopedia of Britannica. It provides some discussion with regard to this quantum mechanism. So I think probably you can look at it by yourself, but we are directly going to read this article. Yeah, so I hope that you have some ideas about these four viewpoints that are discussed by the author in terms of substantialism, subjectivism, and then holism and instrumentalism. And this the author has compared with the four Tatralemma or Chatushkoti of Nagarjuna. So basically, substantialism refers to external reality, actually, physical reality. For example, if you look at this concluding statement, says is particularly referring to these atoms or elementary particles, energy, field of force, laws of nature, and so on, right? That should exist and function in terms of their own laws or own mechanisms. So that is what is referred to here. So so this discussion of atoms and so on comes later. Now, for example, here, if you look at this statement, it says that in traditional metaphysics, the highest substance was often understood as God or as a divine being. So this was one of the view also in this, discussion. See, yeah. So that is the main point in the substantialism. In the discussion of subjectivism, the focus is on the mind, on the consciousness, not on the physical reality, atoms and so on. The focus is on the consciousness here. So according to this idea, it says that whatever things you talk about in relation to existence and functioning of the cosmos, all these are just some ideas, right? It is in a way like how it appears into your consciousness, how you view this, how you see this, because it is only the consciousness that is real, that is existing. Okay, so we have discussed that in some way. This kind of discussion, can be found or can be compared to the Yogacara school of thought, also called Vijnanavada or Chittamatrata, consciousness only or mind only school, right? Because according to that school, all kinds of physical reality and everything is just projection of your mind, how you see things. In fact, I think they go so far as to say that you do not really see what is out there. What you experience is just, it is like one moment of consciousness experiencing the another moment of consciousness. So what you experience is a kind of a projection only. So that is how they provide the discussion. So if you look at the concluding sentence here, it says that even when you talk about electrons, photons, or atoms, they do not really exist. They are models of thought. That is how you view them, you perceive, right? So in the discussion of holism, it includes both 1 and 2, subjectivism and substantialism. And it is called holism or wholeness. It is understood as something concrete, as if it were an object of experience. So what it says is that it does not take sight of any of the previous 2. It includes both. It says that it is a complete whole. There is, substantialism, there is subjectivism, all working together as a whole. And that whole is made absolute and is mystified. So that is the viewpoint that we can get from this holism. And the last one is instrumentalism. In the instrumentalism, as it says here, it refutes, or denies the first 2, subjectivism and substantialism. So what it says is that there can be different ways of understanding what it is. You do not just, say that it is absolutely substantialism or subjectivism. This could be some ways as well, and there could be many more other ways. Instrumentalism is a collective term that denotes a variety of scientific approaches. They have the common feature of considering the totality of human knowledge, including scientific constructs, statements, and theories, as not at all or sometimes merely not primarily realistic reproductions of the structure of reality. Rather, it considers them to be the result of humans' interactions with nature for the purpose of establishing theoretically and practically successful models. For instrumentalism, theories are not a description of the world, but are an instrument for a systematic classification and explanation of observations and for the predictions of facts. I think actually what it emphasizes is that, yeah, you can, follow different approaches to know what is real, what is truth. But ultimately, all these are just some ideas, some concepts, some instruments. They do not; these instruments do not represent the truth. It is something that has to be experienced. Yeah. So the instrumentalist approach is outlined by the experiential physicist Anton Zeilinger. Zeilinger stated in an interview, in classical physics, we speak of a world of things that exist somewhere outside, and we describe their nature. In quantum physics, we have learned that we have to be very careful about this. Ultimately, physical sciences are not sciences of nature, but sciences of statements about nature. Nature in itself is always a construction of mind. Niels Bohr once put it like this: there is no world of quantum, there is only a quantum mechanical description. So even this idea of quantum is rejected, saying that it can be just taken another, it can be considered as another approach to know the reality. It doesn't represent the reality. It merely functions as an instrument. Yeah, so I think probably it can be taken as two ways. One is that it has to be experienced. I think what is implied is that as an observer, you are part of it. So you cannot differentiate yourself from the reality of existence. You just have to be there. Yeah, you just have to experience it, not as an object, as part of it. So that is one, I think, way of looking at it. The other is that what is really real and truth cannot be known. You can come up with different uh, theories, different ideas that do not really represent the truth. They are just some expositions, that's all. So Nagarjuna presents these four extreme concepts of reality in a scheme that is in Sanskrit called Chatushkoti and in Greek Tatralama. In a short form, they can be expressed as follows. Things do not arise substantially, either out of themselves. Okay, so what we should pay attention to is these expressions. You talk about arising, non-arising, or arising, ceasing, but here the discussion is in terms of arising substantially, substantial origination. Okay, so not how do you say, something that is made up. Again, this discussion is in terms of ultimate reality, ultimate truth, not in terms of conventional reality. So that is what it is. Things do not arise substantially either out of themselves, nor out of something else, nor out of both, nor without a cause. So these are the four positions that were rejected by Acharya Nagarjuna. Behind this scheme, there are, as mentioned before, four concepts of reality that can be related to substantial, subjective, holistic, and instrumentalist modes of thought in the modern world. It will be difficult to find a modern person who does not, in his own way, hold one of these four extreme views. This shows that Nagarjuna's philosophy is very up to date. Nagarjuna did not refute the substantial modes of thought in order to end up in subjectivism, even though this is often claimed against him. Nor did he refute the either-or mode of thought in order to end with a view of holism, identity, or wholeness, which some benevolent interpreters say of him. Nor did he refute holism in order to end up at instrumentalism, as is believed by many modern interpreters in imitation of the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Nagarjuna does not fall into any of these extremes because these are the exact four extreme metaphysical concepts that he systematically refutes. Yeah, so I think it is very clear here that when he is refuting the first one, it is not that he's accepting the second position, and when he is refusing the first two, it is not that he's siding with the third standpoint, and when he is refuting the first three, he's not siding with the fourth one either. He refutes or rejects all four viewpoints. Already in the very first verse of the MMK, that is Mula Madhyamika Karika, he points out not only the dilemma but the whole tetralema of our thinking. That verse states, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause does anything, whatever, anywhere arises. So therefore the question is, can we really talk about existence and non-existence of something? This verse can be understood as the principal statement of the MMK, the refutation of the four extreme metaphysical views, which cannot be reconciled with the dependent arising of things. If this is the case, the remainder of the MMK would be merely a clarification of this first verse. Therefore, this requires careful examination. What is the assertion made by this verse? What does it tell us? That nothing can be found, that there is nothing, that nothing exists. Was Nagarjuna denying the external world? Did he wish to refute that which evidently is? Did he want to call into question the world in which we live? Did he wish to deny the presence everywhere of things that somehow arise? If by arise we understand the notion of the empirical arising of things, then we are obliged to argue that if a thing does not arise out of itself, it must arise out of something else. So we should ask, what is the significance of the concept to arise? Yeah, so this is the important point here. Again, look at this expression. The discussion is not in terms of empirical arising, okay? Because when you talk of empirical arising empirically, arising of things empirically, then you can say that if something does not arise out of itself, it can arise out of something else. So therefore, it is important to understand what does he mean by arising first. What does he mean by arise? In what respect he discusses about arising? In another text, Nagarjuna himself gave some indication of how to understand this concept. He writes in his work Yukti Shastika, that which has arisen dependently on this and that has not arisen substantially. So this is what we have studied just now, and it can be found in Yukti Shastika as well. That remember that the discussion here is on arising, what arises substantially. So it says that if something arises depending on this and that means depending on causes and conditions, you cannot really talk of it as substantial arising. what has not arisen substantially, how can it literally be called arisen? Yeah, that which originates due to a cause and does not abide without certain conditions, but disappears when the conditions are absent. How can it be understood as to exist? So in different ways, he's making this firm statement that what kind of arising are you talking about, right? If you are talking about arising in terms of causes and conditions, then you cannot really say that something arising substantially, because when the causes and conditions are not there, it is not going to exist. It should not be there. By the concepts of arising and exist, Nagarjuna does not mean the empirical, but the substantial arising or existence, the ultimate real. When in many other passages of the MMK, Nagarjuna states that things do not arise, they do not exist, they are not to be found, they are not, they are unreal, then clearly this has the meaning things do not arise substantially, they do not exist out of themselves, their independence cannot be found, they are dependent, and in this sense, they are substantially unreal. Now look at this statement very carefully. Here, Nagarjuna is not denying arising of something. Is he denying? What do you think? He is not completely denying arising of things. What he is saying here is that things do not arise substantially. So he is denying substantial arising. Okay, and substantial existence. Yeah, so he confirms it here. Nagarjuna only refutes the idea of a substantial arising of things, of an absolute and independent existence. He does not refute the empirical existence of things. Okay, so everything that is happening empirically in the conventional world is okay. He confirms with that. Okay, he agrees with that. He has no question about it. In a way, yes, but in fact, all kind of conceptual thinking is actually prohibited. Yeah, that is a different matter of discussion, because what the Buddha really says is that do not waste time in discussing anything, just focus on your practice, right? So, but when we take up this topic of discussion, even when you talk of Acharya Nagarjuna, in my opinion, all these great masters, they are actually practitioners themselves, but they had to probably somehow come up with these theories and explanations to explain to people, and also probably to refute some other philosophers who have been probably explaining the teaching of the Buddha wrongly, or accusing, or challenging Buddha's teaching. So I think probably in that situation, masters like Acharya Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Asanga, all these people provided their own explanation. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Here. So this is what he is explaining when he states, it exists implies grasping after eternity. It does not exist implies the philosophy of annihilation. Therefore, a discerning person should not decide on either existence or non-existence. Now, actually, I think probably it would be easier to understand it with this example that, for example, if we are thinking that, we exist, I am me, you are you, right? And we are having our own independent life. We are performing karmas. We are going to experience the result of our own karma. So we are identifying ourselves with our own being, own existence, right? So if we hold on to this extremely, if we are attached to our own being, own existence, I think that results in, eternalism, that, I exist. Even when we say that it is me who is going to attain certain spiritual attainments and so on. You see? So knowingly, unknowingly, this results into the idea of eternalism. On the contrary, if you have this idea that in the actual sense, I do not really exist, I'm just made up of some elements, mental dharma, physical dharma. So in any case, this is just, concept. In reality, nothing is real. I do not exist. So let me just live the way I am living, because after that, there is actually nothing, right? Because from the beginning, I'm not there. So what to really think about, or what to fear from? So I think if we have these views, this could be representative of annihilationism, right? Isn't it? What do you think? I don't see anybody. I don't hear anybody also. It feels like I'm talking to myself. Yeah, that is true. That is true. That is true. All these teachings should make one, energetic, or one should be convinced after going through all these teachings and discussions to put these teachings into practice. That is true. Yes, of course. Then there are different ways of, approaching these teachings. Different people need different types of teachers, different types of environment. Sometimes your karma has to be ripe. From within yourself, you have to have that strong motivation that will drive you towards this direction. That is also important. So all these teachings somehow probably would, inspire us to proceed towards that direction of spirituality finally. Yeah, ultimately it does not really matter. That is true. Okay, let us continue with our reading. For Nagarjuna, the expression to exist has the meaning to exist substantially. His issue is not the empirical existence of things, but the idea of a permanent thing and of things having a substance. Okay? Only the idea of an own being without dependence to something else is refuted by Nagarjuna. Things do not arise out of themselves. They do not exist absolutely. Their permanent being is not to be found. They are not independent, but they are dependently arising. So this aspect is accepted by all these Buddhist teachers, all these masters, that, there is dependent arising. Okay. No, he's saying ultimately it is, there is no point. But of course, as long as you are interested in these teachings, in the discussions, if they function as a driving force, that is of course very useful. But ultimately, that is when you are really approaching to that direction, and you do not really care about all these teachings or ideas and anything. You just try to find a master, and then you try to understand what is enlightenment or awakening. That is what he means, I think. Yes. So even in the case of Acharya Nagarjuna, he says that even though he make use of this expression emptiness, he asks people not to hold on to this idea. You see, so he says that even I do not have any how do you say, any theory. He does not really provide any theory. He does not hold on to any idea. Even the emptiness, so he is talking about emptiness of emptiness. So do not hold on to this idea of emptiness, he says that. So therefore, nobody can really grasp him from anywhere, because he is just in a position to negate. I think probably, yeah, that is true. So even sometimes I find that this modern spiritual teacher, Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, in his speech also, in his talk, if you listen to him carefully, he would find that it is very difficult to, in a way, catch him, because he also negates everything categorically. But of course, it is different because he's not, spiritual or religious teacher, in the sense that he does not really provide any kind of method for practicing and so on. But in the case of all these Buddhist masters, even in the case of Acharya Nagarjuna, you would find in his book a lot of discussion about practicing sila, samadhi, meditation, and prajna, developing prajna, and so on. Okay, I think probably we should have a break for some times. I also feel tired of speaking because you all keep silent. You are not participating in the discussion, and everyone's video is off. Okay, let's have a break. We'll continue our discussion after the break. Okay, let us resume the class. Yeah, let us go through the remaining section of the article. Okay, so yeah, so this is the understanding that is, mentioned here, that this is, according to Acharya Nagarjuna, things do not arise out of themselves. They do not exist absolutely. Their permanent being is not to be found. They are not independent, but they are dependently arising. Okay, so while in the conventional sense, everything is being accepted by Nagarjuna, the discussion here focuses on what is ultimately real. Okay, the many interpretations of Nagarjuna that claim that he is also refuting the empirical existence of objects are making an inadmissible generalization that suggests Nagarjuna approaches subjectivism or instrumentalism. Such interpretations originate in metaphysical approaches that themselves have a difficulty in recognizing the empirical existence of the presenting data, which is not at all the case with Nagarjuna. So if people, based on his explanation, say that he is taking side of subjectivism or instrumentalism as mentioned above, it is not the case. How does Nagarjuna present the dependence of phenomena? So now here comes the discussion of conditionality. The starting point of the MMK is the double nature of phenomena. These fundamental two body systems cannot be further analytically divided. The two bodies constitute a system of two material or immaterial components that complement each other. Okay, so here we see that there is a recognition of two things here. One is material and the other is immaterial. One of the components cannot exist without the other. So this is in simple term you find in early Buddhist text that nama and rupa are mutually dependent, right? So they do not exist independently. One is not without the other. So this kind of discussion is already present in early text, but here probably using different expressions and different approaches, we find similar kind of discussions. Each forms the counterpart of the other. In the MMK, Nagarjuna concerns himself with such concrete two body systems as a thing and its conditions, a walking person and the way to be walked, seer and seen, cause and effect, an entity and its characteristics, a passion and a passionate person, arising and conditions of arising, agent and action, fire and fuel. Some examples of this dependence of the two parts are discussed below. Yeah, so even in the Abhidhammic system also, I think you can actually find similar kind of discussion that, for example, when there is a discussion of Chitta Chaitasika, so it says that you can just mentally dissect, you can mentally just analyze the cognitive process, mental process in terms of, mind movements, and every mind movement is constituted of a particular type of Chitta and a number of Chaitasikas and so on. But then again, if there is a discussion that, is the cognitive process different from the mind moments or cognitive events, that is not so. It is the mind moments that constitute the cognitive process. Okay, so it is like saying, okay, so everything is happening based on this, how do you say, the theory of dependent origination or causality. Then if some people think that causality is a principle that is existing outside what is actually happening, right? So everything that is happening in the world is regulated by this causality. So causality is different from what is happening in the cosmos or in the world and so on. So that is not so. It is what is happening is called causality. Okay, so there is no distinction. So we find similar kind of exposition here. Let's move on to the next passage. Here he provides further elaboration. In this way, we are led into the center of Nagarjuna's philosophy in the first 10 chapters. And some subsequent chapters of M.M.K. Nagarjuna emphasizes one central idea: material or immaterial bodies of two body systems are not identical, nor can they be separated. The most important characteristic of phenomena is their interdependence and the resultant substancelessness, the impossibility of existing individually or independently. This is the meaning of sunyata. Phenomena are without own being and without independence. Reality does not consist of single, isolated material or immaterial components. Phenomena arise only in dependence on other phenomena. They do not arise substantially because dependent phenomena can have no independent existence. I think it is made very clear here. In the Abhidharma tradition, it is explained in terms of Baya phenomena communicating with other Baya phenomena. Okay, so there is just the functioning of this Baya phenomena. Even in the word of Acharya Buddha Gosa, he says that Suddha Dhamma Pavattanti, pure Dhammas roll on. So there is no subjectivity, there is no subjective identity, subjective entity, so there is just a process. That is what it is. There is just a process, but there is no entity there. Okay, so that is the idea conveyed here. Yeah, so for example, the last statement says that they do not arise substantially because dependent phenomena can have no independent existence. Yes, a thing is not independent of its conditions, nor is it identical with them. Yeah, so when you talk of a particular thing in terms of being a production of causes and condition, how do you understand it? How do you differentiate it in relation to its causes and conditions? So what it says is that it is neither same nor different from the causes and conditions. Walking does not exist without the way to be walked. The walking person and the way are not one. So these are some examples, that he's providing to explain what he means by, the relationship between this causality and so on. Okay, so it says walking does not exist without the way to be walked. So when you talk about walking, there should be a way to walk, right? So this is one. The other is that on the other hand, walking person and the way are not the one. So the relationship always is explained in terms of neither nor. A seer is not the same as seen object, but a seer without an object does not exist. Okay, so as soon as you talk about a seer, there is a discussion of object to be seen already included there in the discussion, but they are not the same at the same time. There can be no cause without an effect, or an effect without a cause. The concept cause has no meaning without the concept effect. Cause and effect are not one, but they cannot be separated into two independent concepts. Okay, so they are not identical, neither they are completely separate. Without a characteristic, we cannot speak of a characterized, or of a characterized without a characteristic. How could there be a passionate person without passion? When there are no conditions of arising, there is no arising. Neither exists standing alone. Without action, there can be no agent. Without fire, there can be nothing designated as fuel. The material or immaterial components of a two-body system do not exist in isolation. They are not one, and yet they are not independent of each other. They are not identical. They are not completely separated because there is a certain kind of dependency there. And because of this, they are not real. For two complementary phenomena, or for double concepts, the nature and the existence of each are dependent on the other. The one arises with the other and disappears with the other. This is why a thing arises substantially, neither out of itself, nor out of another one, nor out of both, nor without a cause. Yeah, so here, he provides a kind of a conclusive statement that because of all this reasoning, you can find that actually, cause and effect, they are not identical. They are not one thing, neither they are completely separate. So one does not arise out of itself, neither completely, based on the other, okay, nor out of both, nor without a cause. There is a certain kind of causality that is present there. There is no fundamental core to reality. Rather, reality consists of systems of interacting bodies. So this is the conclusive statement. There is no fundamental core to reality. Okay. Now, yeah, with our discussion that we had previously, and with your understanding of this wave and particle aspect of the fundamental, form of matter, you can, compare this with that. There is no fundamental core of reality. But the reality consists of systems of interacting bodies. So there is a certain type of, causal process that is going on. This concept of reality is initially merely an idea, a pointer to the reality that cannot be described in words. One who can speak about concept-free reality has not experienced it. For the Buddhist tradition based on Nagarjuna, the yogic experience of substancelessness, the ascertainment of dependent arising, the direct perception of reality as it is, all presupposes a high level of a spiritual realization that entails the abandonment of extreme views and the dissolution of the whole edifice of dualistic thought. Yes, so yeah, I think probably if you just look at this statement, you may have some, confusion. You may generate some confusion. One who can speak about concept-free reality has not experienced it. So the question is, what is the point of striving to obtain liberation? Why do you need to obtain liberation? Why do you need to be free? Because you think you are in bondage. You think you are in samsara, right? So because there exists the samsara, therefore there is a need for liberation. So that is the idea that is conveyed here. So ultimately one has to be free from this dualistic thought. To experience sunyata, or the substancelessness of phenomena, means to become free of all entanglements to this world. Nirvana is simply another expression for this. Yes. Interpretations. Now this is the following section in the article. Let's see what the author has to say here. For Nagarjuna, the primary question was not about mind, nor about the origin of knowledge, but about reality. Such objective interest implies more readily to the Yogacara school and the philosophical base of Tantric Buddhism, but the interpretations of the most important work of Yogacara are controversial because they can be understood in an ontological sense, that is, denying the external world and is adopting the view of idealism, or in an epistemic sense for the study of the nature of knowledge, where perception is a projection of mind. Yeah, so this is how it is presented in the Yogacara school of thought, that everything is just mind made, a projection of mind. So that is what this author is trying to articulate here. What is Yogacara is termed Alaya Vijnana. Alaya Vijnana. Alaya Vijnana. I think this word is wrong. Alaya Vijnana. Should be Alaya Vijnana. or the fundamental mind, or in Tantric Buddhism, clear light of Mahamudra refers to the knowledge of reality. Nagarjuna's philosophy is referring to Sunyata itself. In 2003, Tulku Rinpoche presented an all-encompassing position. He says that everything existing partakes in a fundamental mind field, which is the basic substance from which basis mind in a more individual way and the individual body develop. And so this is, I think, a typical, Yogacara standpoint. In order to emphasize that Nagarjuna does not speak only about concepts without substance, but also about objects without substance, I compare this concept of reality with the concept of reality suggested by quantum physics. Physics is not only about concepts, but also about the conditions of physical reality. Undoubtedly, physics only creates models and thus examines only realities that had been posited by physics itself. Nevertheless, we should not go so far as to consider all our perceptions and thought models to be purely adventitious. While the constructions of our mind are not directly identical with reality, they are not purely coincidental, and normally they are not deceptive. Behind these models are empirical objects, and there is some approximation of a structural similarity between a good physical model and the corresponding physical reality. So here, basically, the discussion is that when you talk about quantum physics, this is not an idea, right? It is connected to the physical reality. So in the same way, when there is a discussion of emptiness and so on in this Buddhist schools, in Buddhist systems, it says that it is not just some ideas. It is referring to something that is more fundamental that we need to, understand. Metaphysical foundations of quantum physics. This is not a presentation or criticism of quantum physics, but a discussion of the metaphysical mindsets and principles that underlie quantum physics. The concept of reality in quantum physics can be expressed by the keywords complementarity for interactions and entanglements. Entanglements will not be explained in this short paper. According to Roger Penrose, quantum entanglement is a very strange type of thing. It is somewhere between objects being separate and being in communication with each other. So here the discussion focuses on how actually quantum mechanics takes place, right? In the long prehistory of quantum physics, it could not be proved experimentally whether the smallest element of light were particles or waves. So we come back to the discussion of quantum physics in terms of small elements appearing sometimes as particles, sometimes as waves. Okay, many experiments argued in favor of one or the other assumption. Electrons and photons sometimes act like waves and sometimes like particles. This behavior was named wave-particle dualism. The idea of dualism was therein understood as a logical contradiction in that only one or the other could actually apply. But paradoxically, both appeared. According to this understanding, electrons and photons cannot be both particles and waves. This is the understanding according to atomism. According to atomism, a scientific explanation consists of a reduction of a variable object into its permanent components or mathematical laws that apply to it. This is the fundamental dualistic concept that modern atomism has adopted from the natural philosophy of the ancient Greeks. So here, what you see is that two opinions. One is that waves and particles, when they appear as waves and particles, sometimes as waves, sometimes as particles. One opinion says that it is not, possible. The other says that, its appearance into these two ways is actually possible. According to this, substance and permanence cannot be found in objects of perception of the world in which we live, but can be found in the elementary elements making up objects and the mathematical order applying to them. These material and immaterial foundations hold the world together. They do not change, although everything else changes. According to the expectation of atomism, it should be possible to reduce an object to its independent elements or to its mathematical laws or to its simple and fundamental principles. And according to this, the fundamental elements must be either particles or waves or both. What is to be understood by independent elements? As I have mentioned before, Plato made a distinction between two forms of being, particularly in the second part of his Parmenides. He distinguished between, on the one hand, singular objects which exist exclusively through participation, and insofar as this is the case, they have no own being. And on the other hand, ideas that do have an own being. So in terms of ideas and in terms of objects. Traditional metaphysics adopted this dualism from Plato. An independent own being is characterized in traditional metaphysics as something that, as an existing thing, is not dependent on anything else, existing by itself, subsisting through self, which is completely unlimited by others and free from any kind of foreign command, and exists of itself without anything else. So when you talk about an independent own being, it should exist by itself. So that is the idea here. Albert Einstein was following this metaphysical tradition when he wrote for the classification of things that are introduced in physics. It is essential that these things have for a certain time an independent existence insofar as these things lie in different parts of space. So this is the condition. Insofar as they lie in different parts of space. Without the assumption of such an independent existence, suchness of things which in terms of ordinary thoughts are especially distant from each other, physical thought in the usual sense would not be possible. So what they are trying to say is that there could be some fundamental, how do you say, elements that should exist by themselves in different parts of space. Without the assumption of such an independent existence, suchness of things, which in terms of ordinary thought are spatially distant from each other, physical thought in the usual sense would not be possible. So I'm not very sure what it means by physical thought here. Okay, let's look at the following discussion and see. The idea of an independent reality was projected onto the basic element of the world of matter by atomism. It's very clear. For atomism, a scientific explanation means to reduce the variability and variety of objects and conditions to their permanent, stable, independent, indivisible elements, to their conformity with mathematical laws. According to the expectations of atomism, all variations in nature can be explained in terms of separation, association, and movements of unchanging independent atoms, or still more elementary particles. These particles and their conformity to mathematical laws constitute the core of things, underlie everything, and hold the world together. Yeah, so this is the idea that when you analyze everything into atom and subatoms. So it says that they should, be separated from each other, and they should function in association. And yeah, so yes, but I think, in what way this discussion is focusing on this, because when you talk about separation, of course, we discussed in the last class that how do you say, you can to some extent do this experiment and analyze and see how all these subatomic particles are moving around, and then forming an atom, right? But how do you talk of the separateness of these elements, smaller elementary particles? I'm not very sure, but the association is there. So as it was discussed, especially electrons, protons, and neutrons having 3 different characteristics, and how each of them are attracting other type of subatomic particles to it, and so on. So there is this association. The question of whether the fundamental objects are waves or particles was an explosive issue. At stake were the traditional metaphysical concepts of reality available to quantum physics. It became evident that the fundamental reality could not be grasped by traditional concepts of reality. What is the explanatory worth of atomism if it becomes clear that there are no independent stable atoms or elementary particles, and that objects have no stable core? Were these quantum objects objective, subjective, both, or neither? What is reality? Is the quantum world distinct from the world in which we are living? Yeah. So when this scientist came up with this idea of quantum physics and these elementary particles functioning sometimes in terms of waves, in terms of particles. Now here the author provides further question: if you cannot really identify what it is, if it is wave or particles or what exactly it is, then the question is the process of investigation really objective, or is it subjective, both or neither? So in other words, what we say, these elementary particles functioning as particles or waves, is it the reality, is it the truth, or there is something more than that, beyond this beyond our understanding of it in these ways? This is Niels Bohr. Now here is a discussion with regard to him and his finding. In 1927, the physicist Niels Bohr introduced the concept of complementarity into quantum physics. According to this concept, the wave form and the particle form are not two separate forms that contradict and exclude each other, but are mutually complementary forms that only together can provide a complete description of physical manifestations. So according to Bohr, complementarity meant that in the quantum world, it is impossible to speak about independent quantum objects because they are in an interactive relationship with each other as well as with the instrument of measurement. So this is what we have discussed earlier, that even though they appear differently, there is a certain type of influence from the instrument or measurement. So, and therefore the question arises if what is really what appears before us is really real or not. So that is why the question. Bohr emphasized that this interaction between the quantum object and the instrument of measurement was an inseparable element of quantum objects because it plays a major part in the development of several features of quantum objects. Certain measurements establish electrons and photons as particles and destroy the interference that distinguishes the object as a wave. Other measurements establish the object as a wave. This was Bohr's new concept of reality. From the insight that the quantum object and the instrument of measurement could not be separated, Bohr did not conclude that there are no quantum objects. At least he did not do so when he was arguing in terms of physics. When he spoke about the metaphysics of quantum physics, he sometimes took an instrumentalist approach. For Niels Bohr, the fundamental physical reality consists of interacting and complementary quantum objects. Yeah, so instrumentalist approach here is referring to the fourth approach, where it says that all these are just ideas and different approaches. The reality is, is something else. It is different, right? So, but here in the discussion, we find that as long as Niels Bohr is talking about physics, he's acknowledging that there are some things that appear sometimes as particle and waves, and there is certain kind of influence from instrument of measurement, and it is unavoidable. But when he's talking in terms of metaphysics, he is taking this instrumentalist approach, that these are just some approaches used as an instrument to understand the reality, but they do not really represent, they do not really convey the reality as it is. So these two things are mentioned here. One is the interaction of these elements, and the other is complementarity. Introducing the standard model of quantum physics. In the meantime, the concept of four interactions was introduced into the standard model of quantum physics. These four elementary interactions of four forces obstruct the reduction of quantum objects into independent objects, as Democritus had suggested. The interactions, the forces that operate between the quantum objects, are added to the quantum objects. Instead of singular, independent objects, two body systems or many body systems were established as the base of matter. Between the bodies, interacting forces are effective in keeping the bodies together. These interactions are a composite of the bodies. So there are a number of elements coming together. Mostly they are forces of attraction, and in the case of electromagnetic forces, they can also be forces of repulsion. So I just remember that similar to these two expressions here, forces of attraction and forces of repulsion, in the Theravada Abhidharma you do not have these two categorization, but in the Sarvastivada Abhidharma you have dharmas having these different characteristics. So one set of dharmas are called the dharmas that are of the nature of attracting other dharmas, and the other set of dharmas are characterized in terms of this repulsiveness, that because of that certain other dharmas do not say. One visualizes the interaction between the elementary particles as an interchange of elementary particles. Interchange of elementary particles. Yes, the physicist Steven Weinberg writes about this. At the present moment, the closest we can come to a unified view of nature is a description in terms of elementary particles and their mutual interactions. The most familiar are gravitation and electromagnetism, which, because of their long range, are experienced in the everyday world. Gravity holds our feet on the ground and the planets in their orbits. Electromagnetic interactions of electrons and atomical nuclei are responsible for all the familiar chemical and physical properties of ordinary solids, liquids, and gases. Okay, so I think this is made very clear that there are these two things basically functioning. One is gravitation, the other is electromagnetism. And when you talk about existence and its functioning in terms of fundamental elements or elementary particles, gravity is, as it says, holding our feet on the ground and the planets in their orbit, and the function of electromagnetic interaction of electrons and atomic nuclei is that it is because of this, all these familiar chemical and physical properties of ordinary solids, liquids, and gases have been functioning. Next, both in range and familiarity are the strong interactions which hold protons and neutrons together in the atomic nuclei. The strong forces are limited in range to about, how do you read this? 10 to the point 13, I think, centimeter. I don't know. So are quite insignificant in ordinary life. I see this is used as minus, or even in their scale of the atom. Least familiar are the weak interactions. So there are two forms of interactions are recognized. One is strong interactions among these subatomic particles. The other is weak interactions. They are of such short range and are so weak that they do not seem to play a role in holding anything together. In this respect, the explanations center into very difficult and subtle particulars. How, for example, can an electron that consists only of one particle have an interaction with another quantum object? What part of itself can it emit if it consists only of one particle? This question can be answered by the concept of interactions. Yeah, so I think if you remember in the last class, I've shown you that in the Abhidharma literature, when discussing about real existence, Rupa Dhammas, there is a certain type of counting, and numbering that is provided with regard to each particular type of physical, how do you say, unit. Okay, I can show it to you again. Here. Yeah, so here what is shown is how do you come to this idea of Anu and Paramanu, right? And different unit of this physical, combination of this material dharmas. And here you find composition of the material cluster grouping. Okay, so for example, this is called basic octet, Suddhataka, and there are a certain number of combinations provided here. What are the elements that are present to form this basic octet? And then sound, Suddha Navaka, sound nomad, Jivita Navaka, vital, nonet, yeah, vital nonet, Chakku Dasaka, eye, decade, yes. So one represent Patavi Dhatu, earth element, two Apadhatu, and three Tejadhatu, Vayu Dhatu, five represent color, you have sound, smell, taste, and then nutriment, organ of sight, hearing, smell, and then faculty of life, femininity, masculinity, heart, base. So I think here also some kind of similarity can be found that you need to have a lot of fundamental elements to form a particular physical unit. Yeah, so yeah, how, for example, can an electron that consists not only one particle have an interaction with another quantum object? What part of itself can it emit if it consists only of one particle? This question can be answered by the concept of interactions. In fact, an electron does not exist of only a single particle exactly, because the interaction of the electron is part of it. It is in an article from 1978 about supergravitation. The two physicists, Daniel Z. Friedman and Peter von Neuenhuizen, wrote about it as follows. The observed electron mass is the sum of the bare mass and the self-energy resulting from the interaction of the electron with its own electromagnetic field. Only the sum of the two terms is observable. The observed electron, now here electron is a subatomic particle, right? Electron mass is the sum of the bare mass and the self-energy. So there is a number of bare mass, it is termed as bare mass, and the self-energy resulting from the interaction of the electron with its own electromagnetic field within itself. Only the sum of the two terms is observable. Yeah, so in relation to how electron functions, these two expressions, we need to remember bare mass and self-energy within itself. What quantum physics knows about interactions is here summarized in the words of the physicist Gerhard Hooft, who writes, an electron is surrounded by a cloud of virtual particles which it continually emits and absorbs. This cloud does not consist of photons only, but also of pairs of charged particles, for example, electrons and their antiparticles, the positions. Even a quark is surrounded by a cloud of gluons and pairs of quark and antiquark. So when you talk about an electron, it says that it is surrounded by a cloud of virtual particles which it continually emits and absorbs. So there is a kind of interaction that is going on between this electron and the surrounding cloud of virtual particles. And what this cloud is consisted of, it says that they are consisted of photons, and not only photons, they are also pairs of charged particles. So there are other particles as well. For example, electrons and their antiparticles. Yeah. Even a quark is surrounded by a cloud of gluons and pairs of quark and antiquark. Okay, so this is another unit of these elements. So it's called quark. Singular, isolated, independent quarks have never been observed. In the new research, this phenomenon is called confinement. This means quarks are captives. They cannot appear as a single quark, but only as one of a pair or as one of a trio. When you try to separate two quarks by force, there will appear new quarks between them, which combine into pairs and trios. Claudio Rebbe and other physicists have reported between the quarks and gluons inside an elementary particle, additional quarks and gluons are continuously formed and after a short time again subside. These clouds of virtual particles represent or produce interactions. So how basically the interactions happens within these subatomic particles, that is explained here. We now arrive at the central core of quantum physics. It consists of a new concept of reality, which no longer perceives singular independent elements as the fundamental unit of reality, but rather two body system or two states of a quantum object, or two concepts such as Earth and Moon, proton and electron, proton and neutron, quark and antiquark, wave and measuring instrument, particle and measuring instrument, twin photons, superpositions, spin up and spin down, matter and antimatter, elementary particle and the field of force, law of nature and matter, symmetry and antisymmetry, and so on. So there is no single particle or unit of particle existing by itself. There is always, as it says, there is I think it is based on a kind of attraction and distraction, as it is mentioned earlier. Certain other types of unit of elements are always they are functioning together. These systems cannot be separated into independent parts. They cannot be reduced to two separate independent bodies or states, nor is one fundamental and the other derived as the metaphysical either or scheme that substantialism or subjectivism usually try to establish. So here the reference is made to the first and second type of ideas. Nor are they joined into a seamless unity. They are not the same, they are not identical, they are not a mysterious wholeness as holism indicates, nor can one claim that they are nothing but mathematical models that we have constructed and that do not correspond to physical reality as instrumentalism claims. So now the author is providing here his own conclusion, saying that if you go by any of these four approaches that are mentioned earlier to understand the true nature of this real existence, how it is actually existing and how it is forming the reality of our experience, you cannot find a solid answer if you go by any of these four approaches. Okay, so it is more like the fourth trilemma that we have discussed earlier. It is neither this nor that. There is always a constant change and a constant interaction that is taking place. Therefore, there is no way that you can really pinpoint that it is either this or that. In physics, there is a fundamental reality that is not a one-body system, but a two-body system or an assembly of bodies, a cloud of virtual particles which surround the central or the naked body. Between these bodies, there is an interaction that is one of the composite of these bodies. This understanding of physics cannot be dislodged, and yet all our metaphysical schemata struggle against it. This cloud does not conform to our traditional metaphysical expectations of that which should delineate and underpin stability, substantiality, and order. How can clouds be what we are used to calling the basic elements of matter? How can this small vibrating something be what generations of philosophers and physicists have been searching for in order to arrive at the core of matter or at the ultimate reality? Is this supposed to be it? From these little clouds, we attempt to use metaphysical interpretation to distill something that has substance and that endures. Entirely within the sense of the substance metaphysics of Plato, Werner Heisenberg said that the mathematical forms are the idea of elementary particles, and that the object of elementary particles is corresponding to this mathematical idea. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker called mathematics the essence of nature. According to the physicist Harwick Chopper, fields of force are the ultimate reality. Some of us want to see reality as a mysterious whole, or dismiss them as a construction without any correspondence to empirical reality. All of this only because we do not find it easy to admit that the complex interactions of the world in which we live have their roots in a reality that is itself a complex reality. It is impossible to escape from the entanglement of this world by quantum physics. It is impossible to find an elementary quantum object that is not dependent on other quantum objects or dependent on parts of itself. It is impossible to dissolve the double-sided character of quantum objects. The fundamental reality of our physical world consists of clouds of interacting quantum objects. Yeah, so I think this the author makes a very nice conclusive statement here. So there is another section that is remaining on results that provides more, I think, conclusive statements from the author. So, as you might have noticed, the discussion is quite condensed and also quite intense because of, I think, several things. One is a lot of technical terms are used. The other is that it is quite, in a way, the discussion is a bit philosophical in the sense that it is dealing with fundamental, elements of existence in physics, right? In terms of electrons, protons, waves, particles, quarks, cloud, and so on. And taking this, discussion in comparison with the emptiness idea of Acharya Nagarjuna and how he rejects these 4 standpoints, right? Chatushkoti, when he's discussing the reality of existence, which should not be taken as substantialism, neither should be taken as annihilationism, right?